All right, live now. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this new edition of Mind Debates. Today, we have a special guest with us, author, economist, and urban theorist Sanjeev Sanyal. If you haven't read his work, then I would say pause the hangout. Go and read his book right now. He has written several books and has a column in several leading Indian dailies. He's written on economics. He's written on urban planning, and his latest book is flying off the charts, if I'm not mistaken, The Ocean of Churn, Sanjeev. Although I have to say that The Land of the Seven Rivers remains one of my more favorite ones. So it was a fascinating read. So welcome to the Mind Debate, Sanjeev. It's great to have you.
Good to be here.
Yeah. So together with me are Pramod, Kumar, Buravalli, and Sunanda, Vashisht, my co-conspirators on Mind Debates and Mind Hangouts. So I'm gonna tell Sunanda to talk just a little bit about Sanjeev's book, and then we'll get started with the hangout. Sunanda.
Okay, I have the same dilemma. I can't figure out if I like Land of Seven Rivers more than I like Ocean of the Churn. So I thought about it, and then I decided for today I like Ocean of the Churn more than Land of Seven Rivers. But both fascinating books, and for me, it has been such a wonderful journey to understand the history of my people, or understand my own history through a completely different lens, so to speak. This is not how you read history. And our generation and the generation previous to us, we were told that history is something you read in class, in schools from textbooks, and then somehow you pass the exam and that's it. You are done with it by 12th or 10th or 12th grade. You don't go back to it later. So you have changed that, Sanjeev. For my generation, for a lot of us, I see people actually gifting Land of Seven Rivers and Ocean of Churn to each other. That has never happened before. So you have made history cool, you have made history readable, and you have made history something that people sort of relate to. A lot more than that has happened. So for that, you deserve accolades and congratulations to you.
Thank you.
My first question, however, is this, that Indians are often told that, and this comes from a lot of colonial, era and all that mindset, that you don't have a sense of history. And you, in various of your interventions, public interventions, you've said that's not true at all. We do have a sense of history. We probably, we just don't know where to look. And I remember the famous example you said that even if you go from Delhi to Gurgaon on a milestone, you'll find something historical. So that is there. But when you set out to write your books, right from the first book, was this the grand idea to make Indians to be a disruptor and to have our generation of Indian and world at large think about history, Indian history differently, or you were just doing a personal journey and that's how you arrived here?
Very, very difficult. One can create mythologies after the event, but very frankly,
This is your time. Go ahead.
I'm a curious guy. I'm the sort of guy who, when I was growing up, would take the family transistor and take it apart just for fun. So I am a person who just collects information because I'm just extremely curious about things. And one of the things I'm curious about is who we are. And of course, if you're Indian and you stop for a while and looking at the textbooks as your history and begin to think about things around you as being history, then you begin to see a very different history appear. I mean, you can't walk around in India and touch things without touching something that is, and not just that, it's also, we ourselves are an embodiment of our history. It's quite astonishing. In, a common conversation will bring up allusions to the epics, which are, written, in the Iron Age, or, chant the Gayatri Mantra, which is a Bronze Age chant, or, or if you wander around Bombay or Delhi or Calcutta, cities that I've lived in for many years, you suddenly become curious. Why is this building here? What is this all about? And once you begin investigating this, a very interesting story comes out. The problem was that while I was doing a lot of this investigating for my own entertainment, I found that nobody was writing about it in any systematic way. I mean, there were specialists out there who wrote about these kinds of things, but nobody was sort of putting it all together into a story. And I felt that not so much to overthrow existing history, but simply to write things that I found interesting and I thought that other people might find interesting. So that's really how I got going. And quite frankly, a lot of my writing is from this source. I mean, curiosity. I'm not trained as an urban designer, for example. And I began about more than 15 years ago, writing about cities. I wrote extensively about, the city I live in, Singapore, where I was not born in, but I live here. And I began to investigate things and write about them. And then I suddenly found that other people were interested in this sort of thing. And that's how it all grew. So I can't say that, I started out with a plan and began to do this. I basically began writing things that I was interested in. It sort of grew from there.
Okay, I thought you were going to give a more grander answer and say, let's take history away from historians.
Well,
I'm just kidding.
I mean, one could say that I was doing that. In some sense, it's revenge against textbook history.
True.
Which, frankly, if you read, it's quite odd, unless you happen to be, from, like that. This is not my history at all. Why is it, Sunanda, your history in Kashmir is not mentioned there in any of our history books? Simply not. The coastal history is not mentioned. The history of Bengal is not mentioned. History of Orissa is totally left out. So, the fact is, in some ways, because I did not find my story in there, in the textbooks, but I found it in wandering around the country, I decided to write my own history. So yes, in a sense, you can say there's no contradiction in the two things that I'm saying.
Excellent. Very interesting points and a very interesting perspective. So you're saying your books are an extension of your own discoveries when you were exploring the cities, places you grew up around and stuff.
Yes, and so you will also see that there is no real silos in my writings.
Right.
I will write about history in my economic stuff. I will write about urban planning in my in my history writing. I mean, so if you're reading, for example, Land of Seven Rivers, you'll discover a lot about the evolution of various cities, and that's even there in the Ocean of Churn. You'll see. So there's no silo there. I don't see the world in a silo, and I don't see why writing in any subject should follow those silos.
Yeah, and it's very interesting. That Delhi, Bombay, and Calcutta. Delhi and Calcutta are older cities. Mumbai is a relatively new city. So your experiences with the three cities around them. So you have like the case of ancient Indian history and modern history, kind of amalgamating.
Yes, but the point is these are there. It is such an old country. These are there in layers. So Delhi is, of course, there in the Iron Age, Indraprastha. But then Gurgaon is also a part of the Delhi now. But these things are all layered on top of each other. I mean, right next to Gurgaon is Mehrauli, which was Prithviraj Chauhan's city. So same thing can be said of Chennai or Calcutta or Bombay. I mean, Bombay, the city that you see today, may be a British creation, but there is right next to it Elephanta Caves, which are there from the 8th century port. You can see that in Chennai as well. Chennai itself is a British city, but on one side of it is Kanchi, which was there in the Pallavas' capital, and just on the other side is Mahabalipuram, which was a Pallava port. So, history simply piled on top of everything.
Yeah, it's too complex for us to narrow it down to one point or one focal point.
So Sanjeev, Ocean of Churn, is that philosophically derived from the Samudra Manthan of your, is that where the whole moorings came from? I know that any Manthan comes, there is a Amrit and there is a Halahal. So did you have that kind of thought process also when you went into? Yeah,
absolutely. So when you're talking about the Ocean of Churn, it's an ocean of churn at multiple levels. It's an ocean of churn, of course, because the story describes the migrations of people. It talks about the exchange of ideas. It talks about the exchange of goods. So it's a churn at the at the first derivative level, but it's also at multiple other levels. So yes, it is an allusion to the Samudra Manthan idea. So it is not there by chance. And by the way, my previous book, Land of Seven Rivers, is an allusion to Sapta Sindhu.
Yeah.
So it is an illusion, but it's not just an illusion as a name. It is also about the philosophy of it. You see, as I describe it in the Ocean of Churn in very short, in two pages, but almost all my writings are derived ultimately from the idea of complex adaptive systems, which is a derivative itself of chaos theory. Consequently, all about churn. It's all about movement. It's not about static systems. So when you're talking about Samudra Manthan, it's absolutely right. In fact, I don't know if you've seen a recent piece I wrote along with Jayant Sinha on whether or not it's possible to derive a philosophy of political economy from the Indic civilizational values. And you will see there where I explicitly talk about Manthan as one of the ideas on which our civilization is based.
But the Manthan is done by good and bad, and there is a disruptor, and the disruptor is Mohini. Could you talk about? I know you've mentioned in some of your talks, which I researched, the persona of a disruptor. A disruptor doesn't necessarily need to come from within. It sometimes situations and circumstances from the outside. Could you talk a little bit about that thought process also coming into this book?
Yes. So the idea here is that the system is continuously mutating and churning. That's how I see the world. I see the cities in the same way. So that's why if you read my work on cities, you will see that I am against rigid master planning. So I am much more in favor of organic, evolving cities. I have the same point I make about managing economic policy, where I'm against 5-year plans and that entire process, because my idea is that it's about churn. The world is an evolving, churning system, and it's about managing this evolving, churning system. And this churn throws up good mutations and bad mutations. So it's about how you mitigate the bad mutations, absorb their pain in whatever which way, and allow the good mutations to go forward. So this is a thought that is there in all my writings. So in case you think, I'm just a random guy writing in all kinds of subjects, there is some.
But there is practice in this. You wouldn't have written this unless you're a practicing chronicler. It's a very difficult classification to classify you, Sanjeev. Professionally, personally, philosophically, you are a disruptor per se. And I'll come to that a little bit later, because Aadit has some thoughts on urban planning. He's an engineer, so naturally he wants to talk about that.
Yep.
I know. I wanted to say this. As children, we were raised with, don't be jack of all trades, be master of one. But Sandeep turns that on the head. He is jack of multiple trades and has mastered all of them. So that's
I'm against this whole idea of silos. Because the whole point is that no amount of studying an ant will tell you how the anthill works. Yeah. No amount of studying, the bit, one bit, very, very closely will tell you how the whole functions. Because the world doesn't function like a machine, not the sum total of all the parts. So that is a Newtonian thinking process. All the parts and you get the total. Whereas my whole philosophical basis is based on this chaos theory derived idea that you have to think of the whole thing continuously together. It's about the interactions between the bits. It's not about the bits individually. So that is why all these things that I work on, whether it's history or on economic issues, they're all run on this logic. Those who understand system dynamics engineering will appreciate what I have to say. Mechanical engineers, on the other hand, may not like me.
I know, and I'm not a mechanical engineer, so I absolutely echo everything you said. Actually, what you said about chaos in action, the urban planning and the addressing the urban debate is actually essentially chaos in action, because you're pretty much improvising on what you see out there. And
absolutely. So therefore, consequently, it's not about the greatness of your design. It's about the greatness of your management of transitions. And, one of the funny things is I live in Singapore and I happen to do some work for the Singapore government on creating, a long-term vision for the city. So when somebody hears about this in India, the first thing they tell me, Singapore is a very well-planned city. So I said, no. Actually, in the Indian sense, it does not even have a master plan. Okay, so it's not even planned in the way Indians think of planning. What is it?
Exactly.
Well managed. Being well managed is a very different idea than being well planned. So Chandigarh, for example, created a plan in 1955. It still continues with that plan. Singapore was not even independent in 1955. Since then, it has gone through many plans and has changed itself radically every 10, 15 years. So yes, it does have, tactically it needs to have plans just to put the roads and things together, but it's purely tactical. It is not a grand strategy.
Yeah.
And it's about the continuous management of these, of the transitions that the game is that is what the game is about. It is not about the endpoint utopia. And by the way, I make this point in the book as well. This idea of an endpoint utopia has been the source of a large part of all the evil on this planet.
Very interesting. Very interesting. No, and what you said about planning, you talk about Chandigarh. I grew up all my life next to another planned city, Gandhinagar. And it's the same thing. It was planned back in 40, 50 years ago. And they still, these plans were state of the art in 1962 and they still continue to use them. So
it's all about evolving. So my game, so this is why, I am a great votary of, continuous change and churn. And so there is a link to all these things that I'm talking about. They're not, and there is a philosophical anchor to it all.
I understand what you say about evolving, Sanjeev, but every time I travel, and I spend a lot of time in India traveling through the cities mostly, I don't come back as optimistic as you are about Indian cities. I understand the point about evolving, but I don't understand evolving mindlessly. So we do have to evolve, but somehow growing up like a multi-headed hydra without any...
Yes.
I understand no design, but there has to be some design.
No, so we have to understand what you mean by it. The design emphasis is on the management of this organic process. It is not in trying to impose. So it is about playing. It's. I'll take it back to economic planning, right? It's the same thing. If you did Soviet-style planning and you tried to predetermine where the city would go, which is what Indian master planning tries to do, then it will always fail.
Yeah.
What you need to do is to create a framework so that, like in a capitalist market-driven society, you have continuous innovation and it evolves, but you have underlying on which this evolution happens. So you, instead of investing in creating master plans, what you invest in is some things which are completely different. You invest in clear property rights, for example.
Mm-hmm.
You concentrate on creating trunk infrastructure, but you do not spend a great amount of time thinking about how things will be zoned. You create an initial zoning, but then it evolves as it goes. And so on and so forth. Whereas in India, when you go, people, whenever cities go off track, the thing that people say, we should have planned better. Actually, no. If you had actually succeeded in the plans, we would have gone nowhere. Gurgaon would still be basically a retirement town for Delhi civil servants. That's what the master plan still thinks it is. So that is why you have the emphasis has got to be on the framework, not on the specific. It is about the continuous changing and evolving along with it. That is what the game is about. So Singapore looks today nothing like what it looked like 50 years ago. Chandigarh continues to look the way it did 50 years ago. Those two approaches.
No, I'm coming to Pramod. Pramod, I'm coming to you for the next question, but just I had one quick point to add, because we had a massive debate on this on our podcast about when we were debating the land acquisition bill. And something what you said, because it eventually ties to that. When you're developing urban infrastructure, cities and stuff, how transparent is your acquisition policy, your right-of-way acquisition and everything? And in India, it's made so complex. And I deal with it in Houston here when I, work on the city projects and so forth. It's a completely different, so it's managed so well that it's a lot easier to do.
So that is what? So that is where the emphasis has to be. That's where you spend your time, on the managing of these systems, not on creating these ideal end states.
And bureaucracy exists here as well. It's not completely bureaucratic. Yeah.
Absolutely
but
does. The point,
it's less interfering. Yeah.
So what we have here is a classic example in India of expending enormous energy on the wrong and useless thing, which is trying to figure out a ideal end state. Even if you did a fantastic job of Gandhinagar, the best you would end up with is Brasilia. So it can never succeed. You've already guaranteed to fail. The game is about managing Gurgaon better.
Absolutely.
So from urban planning, let's talk about inner planning or inner engineering, as Sadhguru Jaggi Vasudev keeps saying all the time.
Okay.
You're a practicing Shakta. You're adherent to that tradition. That is one of the most glorious traditions of worshipping Ma, and in a different forms across India, across Southeast Asia. You've had that tradition. I want you to talk a little bit about that tradition and how the differences between Bhakti, Shakta, and different traditions that are there, how that churn is going to happen. Let's just talk the next 100 years. What kind of things do you see? You've always, and this is a tricky part, Sanjeev. I'm not going to let an easy bounce, full toss given to you. The easy part is, the expectation is that the change comes from gurus, established gurus that are there as holders of, at least some, power or some prestige. What is your take on whether that change, where will that change come from?
So you will find that the Shaktas, I'm not even getting into the Tantric Shaktas who are even further out, but even the mainstream Shaktas tend to be quite heretical about almost all these other, or what the others will think about it, about these things. First of all, the Shakta worldview does not, for example, confirm with the Sattvic worldview, which has become in many places the mainstream of Hinduism.
I know.
For example, the whole idea of, somehow the idea of being Sattvic is being something that you aspire to. The Shaktas, of course, dispute that. And, we think that it's about the balance between the three gunas. And if anything, if in doubt, it is better to be Rajasic or Tamasic than being Sattvic. So in a sense, we have the opposite view of all of this. And oddly enough, we consider that the Shakta tradition remains much more true to the original Vedic tradition. So what is this Shakta tradition? Of course, there is the external idea of worshipping female deities, but in a sense, that is the, that is just the external manifestation of our thinking. The key to a lot of the Shakta thinking is the idea that the world is fundamentally chaotic and unstable. Okay, and so this is very important. That's why Shakta, by the way, is itself very closely related to certain forms of Shaivism. So the idea of the Tandava, the world is consequently chaotic. So you can see where my own philosophical links are to the complex adaptive system. It derives very directly from the Shakta tradition.
Yeah.
And of course, my book, as you will read, The Ocean of Churn, is dedicated to the Dark One, the goddess of time, who is none other than Kali.
Yeah. So I am going to... Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so you can see where it comes from. The whole idea of time, evolution. The complex adaptive system is time-dependent, very different from a Newtonian system where time is almost peripheral to the world. So that's where it comes from. Dynamic systems, chaotic universe, time being a destroyer of everything.
Yeah.
So that is the Shakta way of thinking about the whole thing. So in an odd way, I didn't quite explain it in my book. My book is very heavily derived from that line of thought.
Yeah.
Would you be able to?
Yeah.
Sanjeev, the reason why I came to that point is precisely because of your philosophical moorings in the Shakta tradition. That is exactly, I don't know if you know, in the Lord Balaji temple in Tirupati, there is what is installed as a Sri Chakra. Sri Chakra is derived from that tradition of getting that wealth, power, prosperity to that Punya Sthal. And that is also derived from Adi Shankara's Shakta tradition. Anyway, coming back to the pointing, sticking your neck out, and let's say the next 100 years in our own ecosystem, in our own way of churn, what do you think are possibilities that you foresee? I mean, as a disruptor, I don't want you to, basically say specific things, but possibilities.
No, what field? I am little...
in dharma, would you see the mainstreaming of Shakta tradition, specifically because it's more scientific, and that's what I believe in as well. But anyway.
As I said, the Shakta tradition is heretical in many ways. We tend to be much more casual about the Guru Shishya Parampara, for example. We're much more loose about, for example, caste identities. We much more allow for much more mixing of things. For example, the Durga Puja cannot be done unless the first piece that with which the Durga's murti is made, that mud comes from the house of a prostitute. So this is a very important part of the idea of the Shakta tradition, that it's all about the merging and mixing of different parts of the universe, which includes, there's nothing good or bad as such in that way. So that is why it is, in many ways, that's the point I was making. For us, this idea of this hierarchy, ending with the Sattvic way, is itself, to us, it's a heretical idea.
Yeah.
It's a blasphemous idea.
I'm going to bring you from divine to mundane, Sanjeev. Because what we are talking right now is actually a whole new discussion in itself. I come from a field of Kashmir Shaivism. That's what my family sort of follows, and that is very, as you said, very closely related to Shakta. So it is, it's a whole new discussion that opens a whole new paradigm.
You can see where I'm coming from.
But I'm going to bring you to mundane. I have a question that has been bothering me, and I want to ask you. That since we're anyway churning this ocean of knowledge from within you, was it a bad idea for Indian government to invest so much time and resources in non-performing assets? I mean, aren't banks supposed to have NPAs anyway? Or does no one want banks to fail?
Sunanda ji, when he is talking about the divine, you bring money into this. Why do you do that?
Because what do we do without Lakshmi?
No, but and also I'm a Shakta. I think it's a part. It should all be a part of the whole thing.
I know. No, I wanted to ask him this question.
So no. This is actually, I will answer it to you from exactly the same perspective that I've discussed everything else, including cities and Shakta Shaivism, which is that there must be churn. Yeah. And in this churn, some will go bad. That's the whole point about this. So you cannot have finance without some parts of these assets going bad. If you were not going bad, you're not investing, taking risks. So consequently, you must assume some of it will go wrong. The problem is we do not have mechanisms of bankruptcy which allow that take these things that go bad, shred them and spit them out again and liquefy them. And this is the key. The point is not to have such genius bankers that they can always guess which asset is going to go right and go wrong. As long as they are being reasonable, some of it will go right, some of it will go wrong, and finance will work. The game is not to keep accumulating the bad assets over time so that they jam up the system. And let me give you, forget India, let us look at the world. The source of the last economic global crisis is the US. The US took a lot of money, from its own money from the rest of the world, lend it out on credit cards, built random houses, McMansions, and all kinds of things, blew up all of that. A lot of it went belly up. Lehman went belly up. In the end of all of that, what did the US do? It churned it all out, bankrupted people, cleaned up the books, and the banks are still functioning. Europe was the tail of this dog, and it's still stuck. Its banks are stuck. Everything is stuck. Why? Because it simply cannot shred things down. It cannot bankrupt people. It cannot shred out the bad lending and get on with it. So you see, this is the same problem occurring over and over again. The idea is that if you had very well engineered regulations, nothing would ever go bad. That's not the right way of thinking about it. Even with the very best regulations, things will go wrong. And so the system is about the recovery from that. That matters.
Wells Fargo, Sanjeev, I don't know if you have caught up with what's going on with Wells Fargo. Essentially is getting into this whole idea that creating number of accounts, very similar to Jan Dhan Yojana, but I'm not going there. But all I'm saying is the incentives that Wells Fargo executives were getting to create these accounts, many of which have turned out to be fake. And the lineup of the congressional hearings, you must have caught up on that.
Yes.
It's amazing. Yeah.
Things will go wrong. Things will go wrong because people have wrong incentives. People will go down wrong because there are people who are frauds and criminals. It will go wrong because even though you made all the best guesses, you actually had technological change which changed the way the game was played. There are many things that will happen. So how does your system deal with things going wrong? So is your system sitting there trying to avoid the hala being generated by the manthan? Or does it say that, no, we have a Shiva standing by, every time the bad stuff comes out, he will drink some of it up and we'll get on with it. So the game is about creating the Shivas. It's about creating the Shiva who destroys and churns and spits it out or whatever, and then you carry on with it.
Can you talk about the risk takers? You talked about risk. Can you talk about risk takers? You kind of went into the bankruptcy code and what is really required for these risk takers to enable them. I'm a risk taker. I've been an entrepreneur for 10 years. And I do business here in the United States because of the low interest that are offered, a good line of credit. And I'm kind of immune. My personal assets don't get attached when something really bad happens. Hasn't happened. But in India, does the high interest regime really affect you? And when is that churning really going to ever happen? Because people, the middle class, the big middle class is really stuck onto that high interest rates that they get from the banks. And the banks obviously cannot have differential interests for an entrepreneur, right, Sanjeev?
So absolutely. So this is where the mindset problem that I am talking about. The mindset is, if we had great banks, we would give high interest rates to the depositors, and the depositors would get high interest rates, and the banks would lend out properly and they would get their money back. In fact, what happens is nothing such happens. The people who take the money at those high interest rates are basically, in fact, higher risk takers, because the only people who take money at those interest rates are people who are gambling. And the reason they are able to do that is basically because they know that if it goes right, they can keep the money. If it goes wrong, the banks will, political and other contacts they have, will continue rolling it over. That's basically what's happened since 1947. So nobody has ever given back their money. The same families that were rich in 1947 are still, by and large, except of the odd technology entrepreneur, by and large, the same chaps are running it today. Why? Why does America, with low interest rates, churn its business elite and India doesn't? Because you have this, on one hand, the idea that you can engineer this whole thing in a rigid way, and because you have this idea, you consequently set up the whole system to remain essentially, you're doing static maximization at best. Even if you work, it's a static maximization. Whereas what I'm arguing is for a dynamic system which continuously churns people. The point about capitalism is that it's not meant to be for the benefit of the capitalists. You see, capitalism is not here for the benefit of individual capitalists. It's about churning the system so that capitalists rise. If they make good bets, they succeed. But many of them fail and they get thrown away, a new bunch comes and keeps going round and round and round. It's a dynamic system.
No, and also I think our old systems, they were skeptical or afraid about change or about radical changes, and that's why you had the same things being reoriented. Planning Commission was a classic example, the relic of the socialist past. But we can't let you go, and we are coming up to the end of the hangout. We cannot let you go without a discussion on Indian politics, a very short discussion.
Okay.
And before Sunanda, you accuse me that it's because of the Gujaratis' influence that you went from finance to divinity. That was not the case.
I know.
I thought that was we were getting towards that, but let's get to it's almost 2.5 years now. So the government of India is at its halfway point, midpoint, so to speak. Which low-hanging fruits do you think they could have obtained, and they could have, if had some changes, but they did not. They have failed to do so. And where do you think they have succeeded in the last 2.5 years?
Well, I think where they've succeeded is, I think, from everybody I talked to, there's been a genuine reduction in top-level corruption. I think everybody will agree with. There's also been a somewhat of a improvement in implementation of various things. So I think that is gathering pace. So, so in a sense, it's one of those things that gathers pace. So far, it doesn't overwhelm the system, but I think by and large, from what I hear in power sector, in highways and so on, implementation which had got completely stuck in the past. First, it got liquefied in the first year, and the second year, things actually began getting done. So that's again good. But I think they have the areas where things can move a lot better would be, I think the scope for radical tax simplification on the direct tax system. There's a lot of talk about the GST, but in fact, there is a lot simpler tax simplification, lot simpler to do, and lot equally important would be the simplification of the direct tax code, which is extremely complicated in India. I think it can be radically simplified. So I think that is an area where big changes can happen. Other than that, I think a lot of the changes that need to happen in India in the next round really need to happen at the state level. And while we have the theory that competitive federalism and competition between states will lead to progress, so far that process hasn't really taken off. It may take off, but we need to see it take off. But really the place where India does particularly poorly is in the local level governance, whether it is municipal governance or general law and order and so on. And the final area where I think big changes are needed, but it's not just the government, but the judiciary that needs to wake up, is in terms of the enforcement of law and contracts. In my view, and I've written this even in my very first book, The Indian Renaissance, the single biggest area of reform India needs is in reforming the judiciary and the legal system as a whole, not just the judiciary. If there's anything that needs to be changed, that is the one. And it'll have enormous multiplier effects on the rest of the economy. So I think that is the one area where, so far at least, I've seen no change at all.
Okay.
So
I'm going to put Arnab Goswami on Sanjeev Sanyal here right now, and I'm going to ask him, the nation wants to know what is next for Sanjeev Sanyal. Is the government calling? We've seen couple of leaks sometimes, and we know that, I just want to know, is the nation wants to know, not me, is the government calling, and what is next for you?
I am against planning. So I will do all kinds of things, and I have never had a very linear view of life. I never wanted to be a financial markets economist. Till I had become a financial markets economist, I hadn't the faintest clue what that job actually entailed.
Yeah.
I never thought I would become a writer, certainly not of history books. And I never thought I'd have anything to do with urban planning. I've done all of these things. So I'll not even try to guess.
So you
In
need
fact,
to
I
tell
think
us where you're going next so that the experts of that field can move out, because then that's what happens when you
well,
move in.
I'm doing
The
some
experts lose their jobs.
So I'm looking at some interesting work on climate change and modeling of climate change. And the other thing I'm doing is, and this is going to be a real change, I'm actually writing some fiction.
Wow.
Whoa, that is very interesting.
So let's see.
You do a breaking news here, breaking news headlines, Sanjeev Sanyal to write fiction next.
Yeah, it's a series of sort of semi-satirical sort of short stories, but you'll see. But whoever link, there's a theme to it. So yeah, I have a contract with a publisher to do this. So yeah.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. That's great news.
Sunanda, you can announce this breaking news and say that it's not from sources. It's from...
It's directly from the source.
Yes. We anyways don't believe with source-based stuff on MindMakers. So, but with that, it's been a truly fascinating discussion. I hope we had a great time, Sanjeev. And it was fascinating talking to you about that. We went on like a sinusoidal curve. We went from history to contemporary to history back to contemporary, and ended with the present. So
that's okay.
Yeah. And I guess it's also a reflection of how we are all thinking. We are looking, when we think about the present, we always look for historical context about why we are what we are, and why we do.
Absolutely. So if you read my books, you will see I do that all the time. I travel to a place, I talk about how it looks today, right, what it was doing then. So I'm deliberately trying to break these barriers of time, space, fields. So this can be a part of that same agenda.
Absolutely. And before we end the hangout, I would like to plug The Ocean of Churn, Sanjeev Sanyal's book. If you haven't, I think for all our US readers, because it's not available in paperback, you can download it on Kindle.
Yeah.
You can always check it out.
It'll be available, I believe, next month or so.
Okay.
In the US market as well?
Yes, on Amazon, yes.
Okay.
Excellent. Well, there
It's
you go.
evidently already been shipped out, so...
Yeah.
Good luck, Sanjeev, in structuring the chaos.
Yes.
Thank you.
or at least channeling the chaos. Don't try to structure it.
I think that's the right word. Channeling the chaos.
Channeling the chaos.
Or playing with the ball.
Yes.
Yes. No, absolutely. I'm all for that. So with that, we end this session of Mind Debates. Thank you all for joining in. And this is Aadit Kapadia signing off from Houston on yet another fascinating session. Thank you.